Hey Fae folk, welcome back. So for today's video, I want to talk about iconic moments in doll history, things that really just changed and shaped the way that we collect dolls and the types of dolls that are available, and just things that impacted the industry and the community as a whole. This is an idea that's been sort of brewing in the back of my mind for a while now because I'll reference some of these moments in other videos constantly. I don't want to spoil obviously everything that we have to get into today, but for example, Gen 1 of Monster High. I think everyone can agree, whether you are a fan or not of Monster High, that them coming out really did change the doll world. You know, they were so different, and I do think that they really changed the types of dolls that are on shelves. I know they got a lot of new collectors, myself included, involved in the hobby. Again, whether or not you like them, that's up to you. Everyone has their own thoughts and feelings, but you can't deny that that shifted the landscape of doll collecting. So those are the iconic moments that I'm talking about, and again, that I reference quite frequently. And I thought it would be really, really cool to sit down and do an entire dedicated video where I just talk about some of the most iconic moments in doll history. This is not going to be by any means comprehensive, and honestly, labeling something as iconic is also to a certain degree sort of subjective, but I just, was trying to do a little overview of some moments that I thought were really, really important for doll history. Now, some of these moments I did think up by myself, but I did ask you all on the community tab as well to input anything that you thought was a super important moment, because I certainly would never claim to know everything important that has happened in doll history. No way. So I definitely needed your help. I do want to give a huge, huge shout out to everyone who did reply. I'm not including every single suggestion in today's video, and it's not because I think they were bad suggestions. It's just because, like I said, I do think that labeling something as iconic is a little bit subjective. You know, there are going to be things that have really big impacts, things that definitely have an impact, but it's sort of on a lower level. So I think everyone's suggestions were really, really good, but I was trying to go with things that I either saw suggested multiple times or things that I agree were really, really big moments in the dog community. Basically, I was trying to, keep everything on a somewhat even level of the intensity of how iconic it was. I hope that makes sense, because I don't think what I have in my head is translating well. But basically, just don't take it personally if I didn't include your suggestion in this video. That doesn't mean that I don't think it was an important moment. I just, was trying to make everything nice and cohesive and fit together cutely. So we're going to be going through a little timeline that I've created. It should be roughly in order. I might be off by a year. At the most, I might be off by 5 years in terms of I might accidentally put something before the next event and it should have been after, but it's not going to be decades off or anything like that. I tried really hard to get it right, so I think we should be pretty close to accurate on this timeline. But without further ado, let's go ahead and just jump on in. I have my timeline written down, so I'm going to have to be referring to my phone on occasion. I do apologize, but I don't want to forget anything. I don't even know why I bothered to check for the first one, though, because it's pretty impossible to forget the first entry on our iconic doll moments, and that's just the advent of Barbie. I think it would be a little crazy to start this video off with anything other than Barbie being invented, just because it does sort of feel like that was almost the beginning of the modern doll era. As I say that, I do want to make an extra clarification here. Sorry, I should have said this earlier. That's my bad. Because of the fact that I'm American and this is my lived experience, and a lot of the people who watch my videos are American, this might be more centered on iconic doll moments in the Western world. That's not intentional. That's not me trying to exclude anything else on purpose. I'm not trying to be we matter more or anything like that, because I don't believe that. It's just I can only make videos from my perspective, right? So if I'm not including something that is not as mainstream in Western culture, it's not because I think it's not valuable. It's just because either I didn't get a suggestion for it, or I'm literally simply unaware of it. So I hope that makes sense. Anyway, though, back to Barbie. I do think that, especially in America, but also worldwide, Barbie is a worldwide brand. She kind of kicked off everything that we have now. I'm sure at some point some other doll would have been created that was sort of filling the role that Barbie filled, but she's the one who ended up filling it, and so we have to give her her flowers. Barbie is an unbelievably long-standing brand. To go from 1959 and still be I'm gonna say going strong in 2025, even though, you know, we critique Barbie on occasion over here. Even though I think we can recognize the quality isn't as good, there's no denying that Barbie is still a mainstream brand. They're still in so many stores, again, literally across the globe. They still make tons of collector dolls. Like, they're not on their way out, really. You know, like, the quality might have declined, but Barbie as a brand is going strong and is such a recognizable household name. So of course, in a video of iconic doll moments, we have to go back and we're going to start with the original Barbie just coming out and really laying the groundwork for so much of what comes after her. And that is especially going to ring true because the second entry on our list also involves Barbie, and that is the Barbie and the Rockers versus Jem and the Holograms discourse of the 1980s. Now, I do need to say I am like not super duper educated is maybe the best word on this entry. I did read up for it for this video, but this was before my time. I was born in the 90s, so like I wasn't around and certainly wasn't paying attention to dolls in the 80s, so I don't have any firsthand experience of this, but even I have vaguely heard about it, which I do think kind of indicates how iconic it was. And you guys did suggest this in the comments, so I did want to include it. So basically, the situation was in, I believe, 1986, Hasbro came out with, or like showed at a fair or something. Like, you know, they were either coming out with or right about to come out with their Jem and the Holograms dolls. This was a line that had like a tie-in show and everything. Like, it was a big deal for them that they were making these dolls. And allegedly, we're just going to say that just to cover my booty, just in case. Allegedly, Mattel saw that and went, holy shit, Barbie might have some real competition here, which, not to spoil anything for later in the video, but we'll see that they do this a few times. And they promptly came out with Barbie and the Rockers that did at some point end up getting, I believe, just like movies, like VHS tapes. I don't think they ever had a proper show, but when they came out, they did not have a show. Like, Jem and the Holograms kind of came out as a more multimedia experience, but Mattel saw that and was like, absolutely not. You're not getting in our doll territory, and made Barbie and the Rockers to compete with Jem and the Holograms. Barbie did end up winning out in the end. You know, like, there are a lot of people who really love Jem and the Holograms. I'm not trying to discount that. I'm not trying to say that they were shit and like Barbie's incredible or anything like that. But at the end of the day, I think Barbie just had like a certain amount of cultural power, and they pushed Barbie and the Rockers hard. Like, they were not playing around. They wanted to take, allegedly, Jem and the Holograms down. So while there are a lot of people who really love Jem and the Holograms, and that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, there's people who love everything. Barbie kind of kicked them out, and they did end up discontinuing Jem and the Holograms. Barbie and the Rockers also got discontinued, but only after they sort of won the war. So this one, it feels so sad to be like, yeah, Barbie bullied Jem and the Holograms out. But low-key, that is sort of what happened. And I think this is iconic because it really shows, again, a precedent for how Mattel and Barbie specifically are going to respond when they see competition. This next entry might be like a little bit out of left field just because it doesn't technically involve fashion dolls, but it is like right next door, right? So I did think there was enough overlap between the two communities for this to still be a good moment to put in the timeline here. And that is Mattel purchasing Pleasant Company and, you know, taking over American Girl. So American Girl started out being produced by Pleasant Company. I don't think they were even called American Girl up until Mattel bought them, but I could be incorrect. I am, once again, not like an expert on this. There's plenty of videos online that you can find that have like the full historical details of all of this. We're just sort of doing an overview. But Pleasant Company was what started American Girl. They produced the first several American Girls, and it was honestly like a phenomenon is I think the best word for it. These dolls, if you go back and watch people who are unboxing like the vintage Pleasant Company dolls specifically. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna forget the channel name. It's one of my favorites right now though. I think it's I Dream of Johnny. I'll link it somewhere in the description. I think that's what I'm talking about though. He makes really good videos just about all things American Girl, both current and vintage. But you can see him unboxing vintage Pleasant Company American Girl dolls, not Mattel American Girl dolls. And the quality of those pieces was genuinely unreal. Like, I know we said earlier, like, oh, Barbie has declined in quality, but she's sort of declined in like a mass produced quality sort of way. Barbie, even at her height, I don't think ever reached the levels of quality that Pleasant Company had. Like, some of these dolls came with like genuine little, like, I don't know. Okay, I don't want to say porcelain because I don't know if it's literally technically porcelain, but like real cups. Like, it wasn't like plastic shit. It's like real cups and wicker baskets and like wood furniture. Like, it's unreal, unreal. I feel like I keep saying that word, so I'm sorry if I'm being aggravating, but it's crazy the amount of detail that some of these dolls had. And then Mattel swooped in and bought the rights, like, to produce the dolls from Pleasant Company, and now Mattel makes American Girl. And that's like a whole separate sort of discourse that, again, there have been tons of videos made on. Because if you compare the Pleasant Company dolls to the current day Mattel American Girl dolls, there is a very stark difference. You can see it in their historical characters. Like, they still produce some of the exact same characters that Pleasant Company made for a while there. They really like did the Mattel thing and sort of cutesified the line, and that apparently did not go over well. And they have shifted a little bit back closer towards the original Pleasant Company designs for the characters that had original Pleasant Company designs, but never all the way back, and certainly never all the way there in terms of quality. And then the like new things that they have made have sort of gotten, again, cuter and cuter and cuter. And we're also seeing a lot more collaborations happening with American Girl now, where they'll do the Wicked dolls or they'll do so many different Disney dolls. And it's just all different sorts of things that are happening with American Girl under Mattel that, you know, are quite different from how they were happening when the dolls were being produced by Pleasant Company. Now, whether that is for better or worse is not my place to say. I think that's, you know, an individual opinion sort of basis. Quality wise, things have certainly gotten worse, but everything else, it's sort of just things change. You might hate it, you might love it. I'm not here to judge either way, but I do think that this is a very, very iconic moment in doll history, because American Girl is, much like Barbie, at least within America, because it's American Girl, a brand that so many people have heard of, even if they've never owned the dolls themselves, even if they've never cared about dolls themselves. Like, it is not quite to the same degree as Barbie, but it still is a fairly household name. And so a huge shift in that sort of company is something that I felt I had to include in our little iconic moments overview. That finally brings us to an entry, though, where Mattel is not, in fact, the main focus, and that is the introduction of Bratz. This really, really shook things up, and I do kind of feel bad, because I think sometimes I, like, forget about that one, just because it was something that I was so young when they came out. Like, I wasn't really cognizant of, you know, Barbie and marketing and competition on shelves and all of this stuff. I was just like, doll. So when I think of iconic moments, I tend to think of things like Barbie that it's like sort of impossible to ignore, or things like Monster High that I was more aware of. But Bratz coming out in 2001, I believe it was a huge, huge deal for a few different reasons. One, they became a very intense competitor for Barbie, to the point where Bratz was, I always like forget if this was in multiple countries. I know for sure it was, I believe, in the UK that one year Bratz outsold Barbie. And that had not happened before. Like, Barbie had reigned supreme and then Bratz toppled her. Like, this was a huge deal. And then also just the fact of the way that the Bratz were created was a little bit different than how Barbie was being handled at that current time. And I don't mean visually. Obviously, they are quite visually different dolls, but in terms of almost the lore behind them. Because I will give Barbie her credit, okay, and we're gonna, you know, talk more about diversity further down in the video. They have gotten a lot better with producing more diverse dolls. And even, you know, back in 2001, it's not like Barbie never made diverse dolls, but it certainly was not to the same level as they are now. And a very, very key thing about how Barbie handled it, and about how, frankly, a lot of media in that age, and honestly still today, handles it, is that Barbie is the main character. And the cast around her might be diverse, but they are never the main character. It's always Barbie, right? Again, I'm not talking currently, like I know now we have Malibu Barbie and Brooklyn Barbie. Like, I'm not saying Barbie hasn't gotten better about these sorts of things, but that was how things were in the past. Whereas with Bratz, you have this main core group of 4 girls, all of different ethnicities, and none of them is really a more main character than the others. They are the 4 main characters. Each of them has a separate and distinct personality, their own likes and dislikes, and their own style. And it's not like Jade, Sasha, and Yasmin are just like the troop behind Chloe. Chloe is not treated as the default with Bratz. Chloe's just like an equal amongst her peers. And that is just a very, very different way to handle things than how Barbie was handling things. And again, so many other pieces of media and everything were handling it at the time. So this is not the last entry that Bratz is going to make in this video. And not all of them are going to be quite as positive, but I do think it is good to shout out Bratz for back in the 2000s just becoming a very different sort of brand and being able to add that diversity and sort of like appeal to so many more people for it. Immediately after that, we have to talk about the Barbie and Bratz lawsuits. Remember Gem and the Holograms, how I said Mattel really, really doesn't like having competition for Barbie? Yep, they did not like the Bratz coming out. So I'm going to give just like a very, very quick overview of this because there are so many dedicated videos specifically about all of the intricacies of the Bratz versus Barbie series of lawsuits that happened. And quite frankly, like, I just have to give a hot take for a second. It's like interesting, and it is obviously very iconic, a very important moment in doll history, but I don't like find it that fascinating. Like, I feel like people, and this is no shade if you think this is a really interesting topic, like, it's no harm. Obviously, enjoy yourself. But I think that so many people are so interested in this, and they'll like watch video after video after video about the lawsuits, which again is totally fine. I am not in any way judging you, but I just like I don't care. Like, they happened. It is what it is. I don't know. Anyway, that was just a silly little tangent. But basically, what happened was obviously MGA is the brand that creates Bratz, and Mattel and Barbie claimed that one of the people on the Bratz team had actually conceptualized the idea while they had been working at Mattel in years previous. So they claimed that the Bratz IP and like the concept and everything should actually belong to them because the former employee had created it while they were still working at Mattel, so it should be connected to them, and MGA should not have any rights to this. This was like a back and forth thing that happened for years. I believe the initial ruling, I kind of get them mixed up in my head, so I am really, really sorry. But I believe the initial ruling was in Mattel's favor, and then it was like overturned. There was like a countersuit and all of this crazy stuff. Throughout this happening, Mattel also creates Mycene to try to compete with Bratz. And for a while there, Mattel did actually have like prototypes of their own Bratz dolls that were going to come out while they had temporarily won those rights. They like were prepared to make dolls, and then MGA won them back. But because all of this legal litigation, it definitely caused some trouble for Bratz, I think is a good way to put it. As we know, they sort of had their peak and then fell off for a little, and then kind of came back in 2015, and that didn't go super great. And now they're back, they're doing good. But I think the lawsuits had a lot to do with why we started to see Bratz coming with less stuff. And for a while there, they couldn't be produced by MGA at all because, again, as I said, Mattel was prototyping their own because they yoinked that shit out of MGA's hands and then had to give it back. So we really didn't ever get to see Bratz fully live up to their original potential, at least in my mind, because the lawsuits kind of interrupted the flow of them releasing. And at the end of the day, MGA is still the one who holds the Bratz IP and is allowed to make these dolls. Mattel did, temporarily win, but ultimately they did lose in court. Both companies lost because they spent so much money on these lawsuits. But as far as what Bratz could have been, like, they were already so iconic and like incredible and just shook things up as it was. But the lawsuits, I do think, sort of gave them a stumbling block, and it didn't let them continue on at their full glory. So there was no way I could make this video without talking about Barbie versus Bratz and the impact it had. Bratz is doing good now, but honestly, I think it's interesting to think about how good they could have been doing now, or maybe how bad they would have been doing now if they had not had to go through all these lawsuits. Now we get to talk about Monster High. As I said earlier in my example, this was such a huge shift. You know, Barbie and Bratz and Mycene do definitely have their separate styles and they sort of have different vibes. They might appeal to slightly different customer bases. But ultimately, at the end of the day, those are in fact all sort of just normal people, right? Like Barbie, Mycene, Bratz, they're all just people who are wearing everyday clothes or like might have some fantasy themes thrown in on occasion, or they'll have like a fancy dress occasion like doll, but they're normal people. Monster High is monsters. And this shook things up so much. Obviously, there's an enormous fan base for Monster High. They have also proved to have at least a certain degree of brand longevity because they came out in, I want to say 2010. I always like, and like, is it 2010 or 2011? But I think it was 2010. It's 2015 now. They're on their, it's 2015 now. It's 2025 now. They're on their third generation of dolls, but they're doing good. You know, again, we have G3 that is Playline in stores, quite widely available, and also a worldwide thing. And we still have Gen 1 style dolls being made for adult collectors to this day. So Monster High, it hasn't proven the test of time the same way as Barbie, but it very clearly deeply appeals to a huge group of people like me. I'm one of those people. As I said, I think I said, I forget sometimes my exact wording, but Monster High drew in like a whole new subset of collector because when I was a teenager getting into Monster High, I was not interested in Barbie. I am now. But back then I was, you know, kind of a little shit and I didn't want anything pink and frou-frou. I wanted something weird. And Monster High fulfilled that desire and really appealed to a lot of people. The tagline also, be unique, be yourself, be a monster, was a really good message to be sending out to kids. I do think not everyone received that message, but it was a really good message to be sending out to kids. And I think it was sweet that it was a doll line that had such an important message that was being sent out. Like the boxes literally featured, oh, what is this character's freaky flaw? And it's something that was acknowledged as a flaw, but was also sort of celebrated because everyone has flaws. So all of that was incredible and amazing. And you also can't deny the fact that there are several other brands that would not exist if Monster High had never came about. First of which is the sister brand Ever After High. It is ultimately the sister brand, and while Ever After High stands on its own and is incredible on its own, and frankly, I think has a lot better media than Monster High, it would not have come about, I don't think, unless Monster High had been there first to be the catalyst. Then we also have like these sort of competitor brands like Bratzillas and Novi Stars. Those are weird concepts for dolls, right? Like a line of only witches. All of these are like magic practicing people. Or a line of alien dolls is something that might have been a harder sell if Monster High hadn't set the precedent that weird dolls will sell to the general population. So like, I know it might come across a little bit biased just because I am clearly a huge Monster High fan, but I don't think that I'm tooting their horn too much. Like, I really do think that Monster High Generation 1 just coming out and existing and being so widespread was a huge moment in doll history that definitely changed how things happen. Back to Barbie just for a second, because this was around the era that Barbie did start really like focusing in on diversity and different types of diversity. And the thing that we're going to highlight here, it is like a widespread thing that they have sort of continued to expound upon. So I'm not trying to diminish anything that they might have done since then, but this was just a good point to like put in, hey, Barbie starts giving a shit about diversity, like really putting it in there, is when Barbie started making their different body types. I believe this was introduced in the Fashionistas line, where we saw petite and then tall and curvy bodies alongside the Barbie standard. And that was like a really big deal because at this point, you know, Monster High G3 wasn't a thing. And so in terms of like very widespread, easily accessible playline dolls, body diversity really wasn't a consideration, like at least within one brand, right? Like obviously if you buy a Bratz and then you buy a Barbie, they're going to have different bodies, but it was not really a thing you saw to be able to buy from one brand a super tall doll and a super curvy doll. Like that just wasn't it. Now granted, they weren't like super extreme, like the curvy Barbie is not really that curvy, but for what like the climate was at the time, for the lack of curvy Barbie dolls, for the lack of curvy dolls available, again, very readily and easily and affordably for people, that was a big deal that Barbie came out with these different bodies. And again, highlighting, they've done so much more since then. Obviously, skin tones and hair textures, and they've made dolls that represent like different conditions. Like they've made a doll with Down syndrome, they've made a blind Barbie. So it's really, really cool to see that they have put the focus on diversity, at least to some degree. You can definitely still critique Barbie in some areas, but like they are doing a lot there. And I think this was not the catalyst is the wrong word, but this is sort of when I feel like that really kicked off and they definitely started being very intentional with trying to include different types of diversity. So I thought it was worth highlighting. Next up, this one might sound like a little bit strange, but I promise there is a reason for this being included, and that is Mattel losing the Disney license. So Mattel does currently hold the Disney license to make Playline Disney dolls for like Walmart and Target and retailers like that, but for a while there, it was Hasbro. Before it was Hasbro, it was Mattel. Mattel had the license for quite some time. And I'm going to just say, like, a broad allegedly, everything that I say here is not technically confirmed because I get paranoid. But two similar things started happening at a similar time frame. Mattel had Ever After High, as I said, which is a show and a doll line about the descendants of fairy tale. I almost said beings, but beings work. Fairy tale beings. Disney creates Descendants, which is about the children of their famous Disney characters. You might see the similarities here. And allegedly, so did Disney, and they were not happy with that fact, even though Mattel, technically speaking, wasn't infringing on any of their copyrights, because, wow, I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent now, sorry. But the way that fairy tales and Disney princesses and everything work is that the old fairy tales are public domain. Anyone can make a retelling of Cinderella, but you cannot make a retelling of Disney's Cinderella without Disney's express permission. So you can make a story about Cinderella, but if you make a story about Cinderella who like looks exactly like Disney's Cinderella, you're gonna get sued. And so Mattel, technically speaking, was not infringing on Disney's rights because they were not doing Disney princesses specifically. They were not saying, hey, this is Applewhite, the daughter of Disney's Snow White. They were just saying this is the daughter of Snow White, which is, again, a very, very old fairy tale. It's in the public domain. But, Disney being such an enormous company, I think possibly allegedly felt like they should have ownership of fairy tales in general, not just their specific interpretations of fairy tales. And Ever After High, while I don't think it really ever reached the popularity of Monster High, again, stood on its own and was really good and had a lot of attention on it. And so Disney was not really thrilled with that because it's like you have someone who is producing your Disney dolls, but they're also producing a direct competitor realistically to your Disney dolls because they're both about princesses to a certain degree, right? If we're really, really simplifying things. And so they took away the license from Mattel. They did not renew the Disney licensing and instead gave Hasbro the license to make Disney princesses, which, like, obviously, if Hasbro's making dolls and Mattel's making their Ever After High dolls, those are still existing on the same shelves. Like, it's still competition, but it's not competition coming from one company, basically. Just to clarify real quick, I'm sure there are multiple reasons why it specifically was a problem for Mattel to hold the license while making Ever After High, but I don't really think I explained super well why that is. Because like I said, obviously Hasbro Disney would still technically be in competition with Ever After High. And again, this is alleged. I don't know for sure. And I'm sure there are other reasons, but like the reason that immediately comes to mind for me why that would be a better scenario for Disney specifically is that if Mattel is making both Ever After High and Disney, they might be inclined to put more budget into their Ever After High dolls because it's their own IP versus the Disney owned Disney dolls. Or it might be an issue of, okay, I shouldn't say this is confirmed. I think this is just like a rumor that floats around, but allegedly in Disney contracts, it's a thing where the Disney dolls cannot be made on a playline level better than the Disney store dolls are, which I know is extra super confusing, but the Disney store makes dolls and then also licenses out Mattel to make dolls. And Mattel is not allowed to make playline dolls that are better than the Disney store playline dolls. So inherently, either by choice, because they want to promote their own IP better, or because of that contract, the Ever After High dolls just would have more budget and look better than the Disney dolls, and that just is a lot worse coming from the same brand. I hope that makes sense. Sorry, back to the video. And because of that, there is the theory. I hate saying things for certain when it's like I don't work for Disney or Mattel, but it seems like losing the Disney license lost Mattel a good chunk of change. You know, like they were definitely bringing in money from having the Disney license and being allowed to make Disney dolls. And so because of that, that at least contributed to them canceling Ever After High as well as Monster High. It's certainly not the only reason. There was a lot of stuff going on with Mattel in general at that time period. Like Barbie wasn't doing very well. And while Monster High sales were still up, they weren't up enough. You know, that perpetual, like, oh, it's not enough to sell the exact same amount we did last year. We have to have constant growth, which is physically impossible. Like, there is an end point there. But losing the Disney IP and like losing the Disney license definitely contributed to Mattel shutting down these two different areas, or revamping, I guess I should say, because they, did G2 of Monster High and then they had to quit doing Monster High. But yeah, that really, really impacted that. And so, of course, that then had ripple effects across the doll community where it sort of led to what is commonly referred to as a doll drought. And that was basically just like, Barbie, again, wasn't in the best place, wasn't really hitting the same way that she had in years past. And suddenly Monster High is disappearing and Ever After High is disappearing. And there's just not as many dolls on the shelves. It's crazy to think. Again, there were other contributing factors, but it is kind of crazy to think that Disney pulling the license had a hand and had like that ripple effect into so much. Speaking of the doll drought, I did want to, use that moment to talk about LOL OMG. One of you guys did comment, I'm not calling you out, by the way, it's fine, that you thought that LOL OMG should be included for the worse. And I asked why, because I was really confused by that one and I didn't get a response. It's fine. Again, I'm not trying to call you out. If you see this though, let me know down below why you think LOL OMG is like a bad thing for the doll world, because I'm just nosy. Like, you can definitely make that argument. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just am very curious about the reasoning for that, because I was going to include LOLOMG, and I currently am including LOLOMG as a good thing in this video, because they kind of carried the community through the doll drought. Not everyone is a huge fan of LOLOMG, and that's totally fair. It took me quite some time to decide that they were in fact acceptable dolls. It took me some time to get over the face, especially. Like, it just was not for me. But these were dolls that were on the shelves when they were otherwise quite bare. And what's more, they were good dolls. Whether or not you like the faces or even the style and like the clothing and everything like that, purely in terms of quality, you can't really argue that OMG was making incredible dolls. Like, they had so much detail on their dolls really from the get-go. And for so long during these doll drought years, they were making dolls that, again, you might not like yourself, but were consistently high quality, nice playline dolls that also featured a lot of diversity, which was really, really cool to get to see. So yeah, like you definitely don't have to like LOLOMG. And if you think that that was a bad time, that's fine. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. But for me, I feel like I have to at least give LOLOMG some credit, because for a while, they were sort of the only long-lasting brand on shelves outside of Barbie. There were other doll brands that popped up here and there, but they didn't really last the same way OMG did. And for a lot of collectors, OMG was like the only on-shelf thing to buy for a couple of years. So I think they were decently iconic. This next entry technically isn't like specifically about dolls, but it did have a decent impact on the doll community. And that is sort of the adpocalypse here on YouTube and everything that came afterwards. So basically, in I believe 2017, I think it was, we started seeing advertisers pulling their ads from YouTube's platform because they were realizing that not every video the ads were appearing on were really videos that they wanted even tangentially connected to their brand. They, were quite concerned about really inappropriate or harmful content. And so because of that, obviously YouTube panics. They're like, oh shit, all of these advertisers don't want to put ads on our videos anymore. And we need to make money. We need to be able to run these ads. And so because of that, YouTube started implementing much stricter changes for like monetization guidelines and what types of videos are allowed to have ads on them. That has still shifted over the years, kind of both up and down. I think sometimes the changes have been kind of nice and a little bit freeing. Sometimes they've been a little bit more restricted. But the reason that we're bringing this up is because this did specifically impact the doll community, just because dolls are, as I'm sure all of us adult collectors know, typically regarded as things that are for children. It's a very, very common occurrence in the adult doll collecting community to have had people judge you for collecting dolls, and specifically to tell you that's a childish thing, like you need to grow up. What are you doing playing with dolls? You're too old for this. All of which is complete bullshit. Like, who cares genuinely, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, what you do to make yourself happy? And you're not hurting people by collecting dolls. Like, that's perfectly fine. In case anyone needed that reassurance, anyone who's going to judge you for that, frankly, needs to find better things to be worried about. There are plenty of better things to be worried about in this world other than people who just happen to like dolls. But because that is a very, very common, belief in our culture, that adults who collect dolls are weird and childish and like dolls are supposed to only be for kids, there was a lot of concern that people who made doll content were not going to be able to make money off of their videos anymore because it would be labeled as for kids. And it wasn't even entirely unfounded, if we're being honest. Like, I'm sure you've seen or like noticed at my videos at the very, very beginning, there's like my title slide or my like introductory slide. I don't know. But then there's a disclaimer saying, hey, this video is for adult doll collectors. And I'm sure you've heard that from so many other doll content creators. And it's because we quite literally have to say that so that it flags for YouTube and goes, oh, okay, this is a childish form of content, but it's still for adults. I guess we can put ads on. And it doesn't even always work. Like, I know that maybe that sounds silly, that you don't really have to do that. It's not that. You really genuinely do. I personally have had videos, even though I have an entire channel dedicated to literally nothing about dolls, I've had videos get randomly flagged where they're like, hey, this is actually for kids, so we removed the monetization from it. And I have to go in and I have to say, hey, no, this is an adult channel for adult collectors, and this video was an adult video for adult collectors. And thankfully, I've been lucky enough to where YouTube is always like, oh shit, my bad. Here you go. You can have your monetization back. But I've personally experienced that even saying and writing, this is for adults, this is not kids content, isn't always enough to stop doll content from being labeled as for kids and therefore being removed from being monetizable. And I know that I'm not the only one. Like, I know tons of other content creators have had this happen before. So it sounds maybe a little bit silly to just be like, oh yeah, people were worried about their ads, but like, it is a really genuine fear. It's completely what I almost said it's completely founded, but that sounds funny. It's not an unfounded fear whatsoever. And especially when this was like a new policy, and so people sort of didn't understand or didn't know what the workaround was going to be, didn't know how they were going to figure out how to make sure that their videos did get pushed out to adults and were able to be monetized. It did cause a little bit of a stir in the community, and it caused a stir across YouTube in general. Like, that's why it's called the Adpocalypse. But specifically for the doll collecting community or other communities where adults are enjoying quote unquote childish things, it was a much more real concern, and like a sort of it wasn't like okay, well, I guess I have to cuss less. Like, it wasn't one of those situations. It was like, oh, just because of the topic, my whole channel might not be something that is monetizable anymore, and this could like really impact how I do things. So again, sort of not directly exclusively related to dolls, but it was a really big moment in the community. So here we are, it's on the timeline. This next one is also a little bit vague, sorry, but I had to include it. 2020. That's the whole sentence. No, but really, like, obviously, 2020 and the pandemic and COVID impacted the entire world. And it impacted things a lot more seriously than just dolls. Okay. Like, I do want to acknowledge that. I'm talking about it in the context of dolls because this is a doll video on a doll channel. But, like, obviously, it impacted things in much more important ways than just the doll collecting community. But we're going to focus on doll collecting because that's what we're doing here. So because of the lockdowns in 2020, people found themselves at home with a lot of time on their hands, and you couldn't really go many places, and so people turned to different things to keep themselves sane and entertained, while all of their typical avenues of doing that were sort of either limited or completely not available to them. And that could be a lot of things. People got into crafts, people got into like different shows and stuff like that. But more people also got into dolls. And I have to be careful here because this is a topic that I'm actually like I will rant about this for hours, genuinely. But we're going to try to rein it in. So the doll community sort of saw a sudden influx of people who were interested in dolls. And also people like myself who had been interested in dolls, sort of weren't for a little bit, and then got back into dolls. With that, we saw a lot of different things. And I think, there's positives and negatives because I'm never going to complain inherently about the community growing. I love the idea of more people loving dolls and loving collecting them, and like more people that we can connect with and bond. Like, I think that in a vacuum is really, really nice. But there were, just some unintended side effects, you might say. Some people came into the doll community who, you know what? I'm not even going to sugarcoat this shit. Why am I even trying? Like, obviously you got some people in the doll community who are lovely, wonderful people who joined in 2020 and sort of like became part of this online presence, or people who started collecting dolls and are really genuinely wonderful people. You also had a lot of fucking assholes come into the doll community and like see this community that already existed that they entered into, and they thought, I don't like what this community stands for. You definitely got a lot of people who entered. And by the way, I'm not calling out anybody in particular. I don't even know any like individual person that I think exemplifies this. I just have seen the behavior online of people who are coming in and being like, I don't really like that these dolls are diverse. I don't really like that these dolls might have queer representation. There's like a lot of harmful rhetoric that obviously there have always been questionable people in the doll community, because there's questionable people in every community. But I do think just with the sudden influx of new collectors in 2020, really we saw like a decent influx of people specifically who are characters that I personally would not say are welcome in the community, because I don't mess around with that shit. But we also saw sort of more practical things like prices going up on the secondhand market. Prices fluctuate all the time on the secondhand market, so it's not like this is the first time we've ever seen this. But inherently, just because there were so many more people suddenly enjoying dolls, and because at least at the start of 2020, we were still on the tail end of, again, that doll drought, buying secondhand was a big way to be a doll collector. And so because there was all of this increased demand for secondhand dolls, the prices went up. And you can still see that those prices in a lot of ways have not gone down to this day. Bratz and Monster High, horrible, horrible to buy secondhand. Genuinely just not the vibe. So some good, some bad coming out of this, but one way or another, we definitely saw like a boom in the doll community in 2020, and like I think we can't really ignore that in terms of iconic doll moments. But the reason that I was speaking specifically about like early 2020, like everyone going online for dolls in early 2020, is because later in 2020 we had Rainbow High come out, and I really do believe that Rainbow High sort of ended the doll drought. Like, I think that was a huge, huge moment, very much on par in my opinion with like G1 of Monster High, with Bratz. Mm, I mean, I guess Barbie's debatable because Barbie is just like the catalyst for everything we're talking about. But Rainbow High, I think, contributed to bringing a lot of people into doll collecting. It is what got me back into doll collecting because it was like this interest that I had, but I wasn't interested in what was on the shelves. And so I just wasn't really active. And then suddenly Rainbow High came out and I was interested again. I was excited again to get to see these dolls. And I know there are a lot of other people who had the same experience or new people coming into the community who saw these dolls and were like, holy shit, that's incredible. I want to collect these as well. Rainbow High was such a big deal, and especially because of how quality the dolls were. I know I've ranted about this, like honestly, so much you're probably sick of me on this channel, but I can't emphasize enough how high quality Rainbow High was when they first came out. These were dolls that were fully articulated, that came with inset eyes and two very detailed outfits for 25-ish dollars. That's crazy. That was an insane thing that happened, that they came out like that they were so good for like the price that you were paying. You got so much bang for your buck. And so it was just this perfect storm of there's not really a lot else on the shelves and people definitely wanted there to be things on the shelves and they were affordable and everyone was sort of in a completely different place than they thought they would be in 2020, you know? Like, I don't think anyone got through 2020 and was like, yeah, that was just another year. You have all these people who are in lockdown who are like looking for something to, again, keep them sane, keep them happy as you can be with everything that was going on. And here's Rainbow High. They're like, hey, we're going to give you so much for so little. Enjoy. So definitely an extremely iconic moment for dolls. We are sort of ramping up. I know 2020 was only 5 years ago, and within the timeline of this video, that's quite recent, but we still have a lot to get through. The next of which is Monster High releasing the first Skullectors. So the first Skullectors they came out with were Pennywise as like the single set, and then the Grady twins as a double set. And this was so huge. I made a whole video about it very early on in my channel's history, and I didn't even want the dolls. I still don't want the dolls. You know, obviously tons and tons of people love them. They're literally re-releasing the Grady Twins 2-pack. I don't actually know if that would have already happened by the time this video goes up. I can't remember. But that's like how beloved these dolls are. So there is that in and of itself. But the reason that I truly think this is iconic is because this was Monster High coming back. This was something where they had fizzled out so abysmally with G2 and it had been so sad to see, like people who loved Monster High when they were younger, or if you were an adult collector back then, like watching G1 morph into G2 and watching G2 get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper as it went along, and then Monster High was just gone. And it really did feel like it would never come back because there are certain franchises that sort of have time in between consistently between different iterations. You know, like I think it's pretty normal, at least I believe so. I could be wrong on this, but like My Little Pony, I don't think it's that weird for there to be like a year, 2, 3 more gap between different generations of My Little Pony. You know, there are different things that can exist and like they stay in the cultural consciousness and so they can be revived even if they're not constantly there. Even Wednesday I think is a really good example. You know, there are so many different iterations of the Addams Family, the Netflix Wednesday being the latest one of those, and it's not like there's always an Addams Family show or movie available at all times that's brand new. That's not the case. But even in those years where there's not any brand new Addams Family content, the like IP itself is so iconic that it's still in the cultural consciousness and still ready to be picked up for whenever the next iteration is. But Monster High had been new in 2010, you know, like we hadn't seen anything like that before. And they went straight from G1 to G2. Like it was literally, hey, here's the G1 dolls. We're changing it. And so because of that, I think there was a bit of a question in people's minds of, is this ever going to come back? Are we ever going to be able to get more? Or is this all they had to offer? And honestly, I didn't think they were ever coming back. Like, I didn't think that was ever going to be a thing. I thought Monster High was dead and gone, and any other dolls that I bought would have to be secondhand. And then they came out with 2 Skullectors, which honestly was huge because, like, I appreciate G3 more than the first Skullectors in the sense that they appeal to me personally more, and I like that they're playline dolls because they're more affordable. However, I do think them making Skullectors be the first, Monster High thing to be released in a couple of years was really, really cool because on some level, it is one thing where it's probably easier to make a couple of collector dolls that you're releasing on your own website than a whole line of playline dolls that you have to, sell to retailers. But yeah, sorry, I'm like trying to formulate my words here. I think that's probably the bigger reason that they were collector dolls, but part of me wants to believe that it's also because they recognized that there were a lot of people who grew up with Monster High who still loved it so much. And so they wanted to appreciate those fans. They wanted to do something for those now adult collectors. I could be wrong. I could just have my rose colored glasses on, but I think that that's like a nice idea. Regardless of why, though, that's like kind of besides the point. Them coming out, the return of Monster High was such an enormous deal. Like I was elated in that video. Again, not even wanting them because it was just so exciting to see this brand that I had loved be back, be alive again, and knowing that, oh my gosh, these dolls like are coming out. And not only that, they sold out. They did so good. And it opened the door for more Monster High to come out in the future. And obviously we've seen that happen. So like it was just such a big emotional moment for me and for like a lot of other people. And it was such an impactful release. There were some bad things about it, like how quickly they sold out and like the price secondhand now. But that was a really big moment. And I think it did ultimately lead to some really great things. Godly, I just keep yapping. We're going to try to keep this one short. I do think that like this one is certainly iconic. It does feel like maybe one of the lesser impactful ones on this list. And that's not to insult any fans of this particular line. I'm just saying when you compare it to something like even just the Skullectors, like this brand coming back, or like the Barbie and Bratz lawsuits, this does feel a little bit less serious, but there were a bunch of you who suggested it. So here it is in the video, and that is Shadow High coming out, specifically Shadow High Series 1, because I do think the subsequent series where they sort of had fantasy skin tones, it's not that crazy in a world where Rainbow High and Monster High both already exist. But the first line of Shadow High, where it was like a full line of playline dolls that were all in grayscale, that was weird and different. We have seen grayscale dolls before, but a lot of the time they were more of a like collector edition thing. It wasn't necessarily a playline deal where it was being marketed to children. But Shadow High Series 1 was supposed to just be like a perfect companion to Rainbow High. It was supposed to be the literal inverse where Rainbow High has all this color and they have no color. They're all in grayscale. Apparently that didn't go over as well as maybe MGA had hoped, because it seems like kids did not really gravitate towards the grayscale dolls. And obviously we haven't seen any new Shadow High characters that are grayscale like that. Like we have the budget ones and the collector ones that came out this year. But other than that, Shadow High very quickly resorted to still being colorful, just in sort of a different way from Rainbow High. But that first lineup was so different and so unique and so interesting. And also just within the doll community, it was sort of a fascinating event because we did get leaks of like dolls and posters and stuff. And there was so much debate about whether it had been edited, about whether it was really truly going to all be in grayscale, because it wasn't like MGA announced it and like had all these details being like, hey, this is what's going on. Like there was a lot of debate about, oh, are we seeing this? Is this truly a grayscale doll? Or like, no, there's no way that could possibly happen. It was a very fascinating time to be online, let me tell you. And then when they came out, even though they didn't, again, seem to do great with kids, so many adult collectors loved and still love Shadow High. So again, I don't necessarily think it's quite on the same level as some of the other things we've talked about, but it certainly was iconic in its own right. And like, I think it's justifiable to include in the video. Next thing to talk about is the Bratz Pride pack with Nevra and Roxy. This was a really, really cool release to see for the queer community because it was literally a pride pack of two girls dating, two existing Bratz characters dating, both girls. And that was so, so huge to get to see, not only from dolls in general, because that it wasn't like they were the first queer dolls ever. I'm not trying to say that. But it wasn't a common thing for that to be something that was represented within dolls, and also for it to be such an enormous brand as Bratz. Like, I'm not in any means trying to discount any smaller brands or even individual creators that made dolls that had queer representation, but it was huge to see Bratz, like arguably one of the biggest doll brands in modern history, make this Pride pack and like make it. I mean, so proudly, I almost said, but that, duh, it's a Pride pack. It was just such an astronomical thing to get to see. And the extra layer of it being pre existing characters, where it's not like they just like whipped two lesbians. That's not, oh, that was a bad way to put it. Whatever. It's not like they just like pulled together two random lesbian characters and were like, okay, here you go, they're lesbians. They took characters that had already been part of the Bratz canon, admittedly not necessarily like super main characters, like not core four characters, but two like characters that were already in the Bratz canon that people already would be fans of and would already have dolls of, and they said, hey, yeah, they're actually in a relationship. And obviously creating new characters that can be queer representation is good as well. I'm not trying to discount that whatsoever, but I think there's just a certain impact in having characters that people already might be bonded to be that representation that just has like a little extra hit to it. And it did just mean a lot for the community. And so did the next entry, which is Monster High G3, and specifically all of the diversity that it brought with it. Going, off of the queer thing for a moment here, we obviously have Frankie being non-binary, and that's so huge to have it be like a core component of their character. Like, that's part of who they are. And it's explicitly stated, it's not implied or anything like that. Like, it is right there. It's, hey, this is a non-binary character, and that's how you should refer to them. And it was so amazing to get to see that. Like, I'm kind of at a loss for words, because if you are not part of any sort of marginalized community, I think it's hard to maybe understand why it matters so much, like why it feels so good. But as someone who is non-binary, seeing Frankie also be non-binary, and especially like they're a femme presenting non-binary, which is sort of how I am, it's just so surreal to be like, oh, here's a character that I can feel connected to in that way. And, broader society might still think I'm kind of like weird, or I might still get judgment for this. But here's a character from a franchise that I love that is like me. Like, that's just such a big deal. And I know people feel that way about all sorts of diversity. And G3 has given us a lot of that. Like, we have increased and more accurate diversity for different ethnicities. Again, still not perfect. I always have to give this disclaimer because anytime I praise G3, someone comes up in my comments and is like, yeah, well, I know they're not perfect. I get that. But there is still more diversity, and it is still at least more accurate diversity, again, when it comes to like the ethnicities, than there was in G1 of Monster High. There's body diversity, not only in the show, but also in the dolls. Do you know how like incredible it is to see dolls that are closer to your shape? Like, I don't want to say famously because that's crazy. No part of me is close to famous. But if you have seen the channel before, at least within our community, maybe famously, I cried unboxing Caddy because she has little fat rolls. She's not just a curvy character like a curvy Barbie. We're like, that's good too. There are people who are shaped like that, and that is also needed representation. But it was so crazy to me to see a doll. It was a plus size doll, but she wasn't the socially acceptable standard of plus size where you've got big boobs and a tiny little waist and a flat stomach. That's very important, and big hips. That's like the socially acceptable plus size. If you look like that, you are beautiful, you're fabulous, you deserve to be accepted also. But it meant so much to me to see a plus size doll that was also like plus size in the quote unquote bad way, where she has a tummy, she has some rolls, and she looks more like I do when I look in the mirror. Like, that was such a huge thing. And I know I'm not the only person who's felt that way. G3 Venus being black, her newest doll coming with a bonnet, it means so much to so many people. I'm getting emotional here, clearly. Sorry. But I just think it's so, so cool like we talked about with the Bratz Pride pack, I think that was so impactful. And then G3 having all of this diversity. I think G3 coming out and like reviving Monster High was iconic in its own right, but especially doing so with such a clear and intense focus on trying to represent so many different kinds of people, I think it's just so beautiful and so incredible. And all I can say is I hope they continue because pop off. Almost done. Two more to get through. The first of which is the Bratz X Mean Girl release. I don't know why I said Bratz X Mean Girl. That was weird to say out loud. The Bratz and Mean Girl collab. Mean Girl. Mean Girls. We're just going to take this from the top. The Bratz and Mean Girls collab. There we go. The first one, to be clear. The second one, I mean, that wouldn't have happened if the first one hadn't happened. The first one's definitely more iconic. The reason it's iconic is because this was a huge release. Obviously, Bratz is a huge IP, very iconic IP. Mean Girls also has a cult following, like very, very popular movie. Combining them, so many people were excited about these, so many people were interested in these, and for, you know, good reason and all of that. But the release went very, very poorly. And anyone who has bought specifically like Monster High, Barbie can get a little iffy on Mattel Creations, but I know Monster High is, it's bad over there. Anyone who's bought a Monster High doll in Mattel Creations knows that a shitty release like this, where it sells out super fast and most people can't get it, and you know resellers just go absolutely insane, and bots get a bunch of them. We know that that has happened so many times and continues to happen. It's definitely not something that has been fixed entirely, but for some reason, I don't know if it was just the specific individuals in the different fandoms that wanted the Bratz and Mean Girls collab. Possibly it was just because it was such an enormous thing, like so many people wanted it, that it like caused more issues. But for some reason, all of the other like dolls that have come out that have had shitty releases like that definitely got backlash, but it didn't change anything. You know, like it didn't, with again Monster High as the example, Pennywise selling out super fast when they first made the Skullectors really didn't make them change that much in subsequent Skullector releases. You know, they can say they did whatever they might have claimed to do about like preventing bots from buying them, but let's be honest, bots still get a lot of the Monster High releases. Resellers still get a lot of the Monster High releases, and like they still sell out insanely fast. It's not like a ton has changed. They've gotten slightly better with some of their releases, but not a lot has changed. Something about the Bratz and Mean Girls release, the response kicked MGA into gear. Like they just did something different. And it's interesting because I really truly can't pinpoint what it is. Maybe it honestly just comes down to like MGA is a different company and maybe they like folded faster than Mattel. I truly have no idea. But that release was so abysmal and the outcry was so loud that I do think it changed at least how MGA has handled some of their subsequent releases. They have not been perfect either. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to like, you know, be too proud of them. But they definitely have changed how certain releases happen. Case in point, there's literally a second part to this collab. And you know what has been much more readily available? The second set of Mean Girls and Bratz dolls. Like, I think those were literally not even exclusive to Bratz. The first ones, at least within the US, were exclusive to Bratz. And the second set, I think, was available on Amazon. So, like, just the fact of that shows you that they saw the anger from their fans with that first release, and they were like, shit, we gotta fix something about this. Now, again, they definitely still have their problems. For a little bit there was like a weird situation where they like weren't shipping dolls to all of the countries that they had previously shipped dolls to. It's very strange. I don't know why companies do what they do, but I mean, you can't deny that there was at least some sort of positive outcome from people being so mad about the Mean Girls release. And honestly, tacking on to that, it's just fascinating to me how it seems like the Bratz fandom can make things shift in a way that other fandoms can't. Because semi-recently, the Bratz and Hello Kitty collab came out. I was going to make a whole video on it, and then there were so many other things going on in my life that I just like couldn't. I still have to talk about them in a Dolls I Don't Want video, whatever. That's that's for me. That doesn't matter. But with the Bratz and Hello Kitty collab, they only made 3 out of the 4 main characters. Guess which one was excluded? It was Sasha. For sure, it was Sasha. And people were pissed, rightfully so. I think that's insane. I think that it's quite normal to be like, oh, we can only do like $2 for a collab. Let's pick two out of the main four. That I think is fine. But doing three out of the main four and not including the fourth one, it looks intentional. And especially when you specifically choose not to make the black character, get out. What are you doing? Like, I don't know. I don't know who. Let's not get heated. I can't believe that that happened to begin with. But the backlash was so intense, well deserved, rightfully intense, that Bratz real quick was like, shit, she's coming. We're gonna make her too. We're gonna make Sasha too. And they did just recently release like a little animated thing on their stories, I believe, on Instagram, where they showed like the animated version of the design that they had for Sasha with the Bratz and Hello Kitty collab. So something about the Bratz fandom just like can bully them a little bit better than we can other fandoms, which I think is quite funny, and certainly rather iconic. But that brings us to the last entry for today, which truthfully is like a little bit more of an honorable mention. Like it's not necessarily as iconic, but one of you guys actually referred to it in the comments as an inside joke, and I think that's the perfect way to put it. And that's the fact that Wild Child's dolls still haven't released. I'll put on screen here the latest like prototype that we've seen from Wild Child's, but they're basically a brand that is trying to make sort of anthropomorphic animal dolls. There's like a whole website and everything. These dolls have been in like the prototyping stage for a decade, like dead ass for a decade. I think the first prototypes were like shown back in 2015, and they're still trying. Now, that's not me trying to like shit on Wild Childs. I fully understand that there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through to introduce a new doll line to get retailers to pick it up. And especially if you aren't connected to one of these enormous brands like Mattel or MGA, where it's like, they sort of already have an in with retailers, right? Like it's a hell of a lot easier for Mattel to pitch a new product to Walmart than for me to pitch a new product to Walmart. So like I understand that it is hard for them. Like I understand there's a lot to go through. I understand that it is not entirely on the Wild Child's team what's going on, but it is just sort of funny that these are dolls that were concepted. I mean, they would have been conceptualized. Concepted is not conceptualized. They would have been conceptualized more than 10 years ago if the first prototypes were 10 years ago. And they're just having a really hard time, and it feels so awful because I do really think that these have the potential to be super cool dolls. Like the prototype that is on screen right now, I want to buy that. I want to buy that so bad, but it's just not here. We did get word like a while ago that they were supposed to be approved by retailers, like they were, semi-approved. I think it was a situation where they weren't going to be able to get all four dolls that they wanted to get out on shelves, so they had to like narrow it down to two as sort of like an entry point, and then if those did well, they might pick up more. But that was ages ago, and we really haven't heard much since. So who knows when or if we will ever get to see Wild Child's dolls. I hope we do. It'd be really cool. But the funny, iconic part is simply the fact of them having been in development for just so, so long. So we have kind of a funny little conclusion to today's video. This was really fun to do, to go through and like talk about these different things and the way that they impact the wider doll community. If you have any other things that you think fit into the timeline that you think were also really, community shaping events, please feel free to drop them down below. If you want to talk about anything that we talked about today, I just like hearing y'all's opinions. It's not like a time synced conversation exactly, because I'm filming and then I have to edit and post and everything, and then you'll get to see it. But it does feel like having a conversation whenever you guys like put your input in the comments. So feel free down below. Always love to hear what you have to say. But that's going to be it for me for today, y'all. I do hope you enjoyed our little iconic doll moments timeline. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.